Okay, so Joshua chapter 12. Here we go. Now these are the kings of the land whom the sons of Israel defeated, and whose land they possessed beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise, from the valley of the Arnon as far as Mount Hermon, and all the Arabah to the east. Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon and ruled from Aror, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, both the middle of the valley and half of Gilead, even as far as the brook Jabbok, the border of the sons of Ammon, and the Arabah as far as the Sea of Kinnerot, that is the Sea of Galilee, toward the east, and as far as the Sea of the Arabah, even the Salt Sea, that is the Dead Sea, eastward toward Beth Yeshimot, and on the south, at the foot of the slopes of Pisgah, in the territory of Og, king of Bashan, one of the remnant of the Rephaim, who lived at Ashtaroth and at Edrei, and ruled over Mount Hermon and Salakah and all Bashan, as far as the border of the Geshurites and the Maacathites, and half of Gilead, as far as the border of Sihon, the king of Heshbon. Moses, the servant of Yahweh, and the sons of Israel defeated them. And Moses, the servant of Yahweh, gave it to the Reubenites and the Gadites and half of the tribe of Manasseh as a possession. Now the kings, now these are the kings of the land whom Joshua and the sons of Israel defeated beyond the Jordan toward the west, from Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon, even as far as Mount Halak, which rises towards Seir. And Joshua gave it to the tribes of Israel as a possession, according to their divisions, in the hill country, in the lowland, in the Arabah, on the slopes, and in the wilderness, and in the Negev. The Hittite, the Amorite, and the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. The king of Jericho, 1. The king of Ai, which is beside Bethel, 1. The king of Jerusalem, 1. The king of Hebron, 1. The king of Yarmut, 1. The king of Lachish, 1. The king of Eglon, 1. The king of Gezer, 1. The king of Debir, 1. The king of Geder, 1. The king of Hormah, 1. The king of Arad, 1. The king of Libnah, 1. The king of Adullam, 1. The king of Makkedah, 1. The king of Bethel, 1. The king of Tapua, 1. The king of Hefer, 1. The king of Aphek, 1. The king of Lasharon, 1. The king of Madon, 1. The king of Hatzor, 1. The king of Shimron Meron, 1. The king of Aksaph, 1. The king of Taanach, 1. The king of Megiddo, 1. The king of Kadesh, 1. The king of Yokneam in Carmel, 1. The king of Dor in the heights of Dor, 1. The king of Goyim in Gilgal, 1. The king of Tirzah, 1. In all, 31 kings. Now I'm going to stop right there because that is the beginning of chapter 13. But in chapter 12, you might think to yourself, after having read through this, what is the spiritual instruction for me in this section? Does anyone want to pipe in and say what if they saw anything in there that captured their attention? I know it's a little weird, it's a little awkward. It's just a list of names. Some of them we've seen before. In fact, well, most of them we've seen before, talking about the peoples on the east side of the Jordan that were previously defeated by Moses and the Israelites, and then a list of the kings on the west side of the Jordan that had recently been defeated in the north and the south by Joshua and the Israelites. But do you see anything that captures your attention, or maybe it hints at something that might be spiritually beneficial in this section? Because I know it's tough. It just looks like a list of names and places. And what might be the purpose of this? Any ideas? Go ahead, Carla.
Well, it has crossed my mind, but I have not taken it farther than that. in His Word. And I go back to something I heard a number of years ago about messages in names. Like when you take, like from Adam, the delineated line from Adam to Noah,
Right.
and you put the meanings of the names together, it has a prophecy in it. Like, if I may, from Adam, Seth, Enosh, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. If you put them together, it means man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down teaching, and his death shall bring the despairing comfort and rest. And I think that's just so phenomenal. So I can't help but wonder if some of these names have something like that for us to gather information about and maybe prophesize about. So
Sure.
that's all I had.
And that's, that is not only an excellent observation, that would be my first inclination when I come across, a list of names like that, is to slow down and look at what these names mean in Hebrew and write them down just one after another and start to, see. Now, there have been times where the lists of names, as the one that you mentioned in the descendants of Adam and Noah, where you just string them together and there's a prophetic message there, that's just beyond the pale. That's awesome, is what that is. But were you going to say something, Lori? You're just waving? Okay. Sometimes you look at the names and you think about them for a moment and you think, okay, this name is significant. It doesn't, not necessarily that you're going to string it together and have a message, but the names themselves seem to signify something. Now, the interesting thing is that, we've already seen a lot of these names. I mean, we saw Sihon and Og and Aror and Heshbon. We looked at all those places when we studied the book of Numbers. We also, talked about them previously in the book of Joshua. Does anybody remember anything about those names and what we noted in our study in regard to those names? Anybody remember what those names are or what they might represent? So if you look at verse 2 in Joshua 12, you've got Sihon, it's got that sound, the king of the Amorites. Now Sihon means warrior. It is translated as warrior, the king of the talkers. Now your Hebrew is likely to say for the Amorites a sayer. That's a weird way of saying a talker. So I think, a sayer just sounds weird. We don't really talk like that. I wouldn't say, yeah, she's a sayer. I would say she's a talker. You know what I'm saying? So I think do you guys remember talking about this before when we talked about Heshbon and Og and of Bashan and stuff like that? The thing here that I think is potentially instructive, and I might be reaching slightly, but in our previous study we talked about how the east side of the Jordan seems to be indicative of something. At least it does to me. That there's, this idea of crossing over the river, and there's the promised land over there, but the east side of the river seems to be like second best, or we're wanting to get close to God, but not that close. Yeah, we know that your kingdom is just over there, but this is close enough for our comfort. that kind of thing. I don't know. Angela, am I talking like crazy? Are you picking up what I'm putting down?
Yeah.
You hearing what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Do you agree? Do you have that impression yourself?
Yeah, that's still in the wilderness.
Yeah, they're kind of still in the wilderness, so to speak. They're just on the other side of the river. They're so close.
Special about crossing that river.
Yeah, I do think so. And we talked about that before, that there's something special about crossing that river. Some of the things that you saw when they crossed over that river in the earlier chapters in Joshua, it's just that these guys, Gad, Reuben and Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh decided to stay on the other side. And to me, the idea that these kings, Sihon and Og, on the other side of the river, do you know how many times Sihon and Og are repeated? Many times. Many times. A lot. So it really leads me to believe that Sihon and Og represent something. Now, yes, the Israelites under Moses defeated them, but they got stuck in their place. That you got two lists of defeated peoples here in chapter 12. One is these Amorites that are on the other side of the Jordan and under Moses, and then all these other kings that were defeated under Joshua and the Israelites. And they are representative of different things. I think when we talked about Sihon and Og, that the common idea among a lot of rabbinic scholars is that Sihon and Og represent, apparently Sihon represents a kind of human reason, which is kind of like the opposite of faith. Human reason is challenging sometimes. I mean, God gives us a brain that works, and that we need to use our human reason in certain places in this life. Human reason is a very valuable thing. But in dealing with God and His ways, and really dealing with our faith life, human reason can really get in our way. It inhibits our faith. And it's not just because, and I think, many people might think, well, we're not, it's not a great idea to just throw yourself to the faith and say, I believe everything, in casting aside all ability to think and just saying, I'm living by faith. I don't mean that necessarily. That can be foolishness. But what I do mean is that your human intellect can be a detriment and a stumbling block. And it is especially true, I think, when we are dealing with situations in life like many of us are right now, most especially at the end of the age, which I believe many of us think we are on the cusp of the end of the ages, that looking around us and being able to have faith in God and have faith that God is in control of all of these situations that seem out of control, our human logic can get in the way of having eyes of faith to be able to see really clearly what is happening in the world around us. I think that's going to be a real challenge for many believers moving forward, is recognizing the hand of God in everything that's happening around us, because it seems absolutely chaos and it's completely out of control out in the world around us. And how could God have His hand in that? Because God is not a God of chaos. He is a God of control. Well, I think God is a God of controlled chaos. Or He likes to organize chaos, but sometimes I think we need to remember that God can take His hand off of a situation and remove His hedge of protection and allow mankind's own chaos to rule, so that man can get a taste of his own medicine, so that man can say, God can say to man later, this is what you wanted. You wanted me out of your life. You wanted me and my son and my principles, my Torah, everything about me. You wanted me out of your society, out of the world entirely. I will allow you to have that. You will not like it. But for those people who are his, still lingering about out here, that might be hard to accept. That might be really hard to accept. Does that mean that God is gone? No, of course not. But it might seem like it to a lot of people if they don't have the eyes to see what he's doing. They might really sense, man, where is God? What is he doing? Come here, Angela.
That happened in the wilderness.
Yes, please.
They said in the wilderness, they said, is God even with us? And that's the kind of doubt and questioning that moves you out from the protection of the cloud.
Pause. Could you hear her? Kinda? Come closer.
I don't want to be on the camera.
You don't want to be on the camera?
No.
Too bad. Get over here. No, get a chair and sit next to me. You won't be in the shot. Just pull up that thing right there, because I think that what you got to say is important. I definitely, I'll just wait until Angela gets situated here, but it seems to me, yes, that we might have the danger of having God say, I'm going to pull back from the world stage a little bit and just allow a little bit of chaos into the world, maybe a lot of chaos into the world, as man decides that he's going to run this whole thing. It's all going to come apart at the hinges, but what about us who believe? Are we going to freak out and say, man, what happened to God? Where is God? What is he doing? Yeah, some of us are going to freak out. We absolutely are. Angela?
I don't remember what I said.
You said something about them freaking out in the wilderness and...
Well, yeah, and this chaos thing you're talking about, on day one, he separated the light from the dark, and it wasn't visible light. It was basically chaos. It was like matter from antimatter. It was chaos from order. And so that's what's happening with Passover and the Exodus right before they go into the wilderness, is he's separating chaos from order. And he takes them into the wilderness and he places them under his cloud of protection. And when they get in trouble is when they ask questions like, is God even with us? Mm-hmm. And it's that kind of doubt, and it's that kind of need to control their own circumstances instead of relying on God's control that moved. I don't even know if God removed the hedge of protection in that instance. I think that kind of question moves you out from the cloud, from his protective cloud. And this happens when they complain. This happens when they question God's control. And I think that those lessons, it says those lessons are written for us. And so we need to pay really close attention to what they did wrong in the wilderness, because we want to stay in the cloud of protection. And I think it's there. I really do think it's there right now. And when we do things like this doubt or the focus on the way things were, the same things they did in the wilderness, we are doing now. I hear it all the time, the same exact things. We did not learn the lesson.
Well, let me ask you to elaborate slightly. What do you mean you hear these same things now?
Lamenting about the way it was 2 years ago.
2 years ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago?
Especially in regards to our food.
Our food? What do you...
Oh, the grocery store.
What do you mean?
Like, how, it was so easy to find certain things at the grocery store and then it wasn't. Or now we have to wear masks to the grocery store. Wasn't it great back in Egypt when we could just go buy anything we wanted? I mean, it's kind of the same thing where these conveniences and these systems are being removed from us, and instead of moving with God and his plan and this change, we are lamenting about the way it was, just like they did.
Okay, I like it. Mike, do you look like you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, along those lines of questioning if God is among them or not, that line of questioning really comes from the adversary. If you recognize the temptation of Yeshua, each of the temptations started with, if you really are the Son of God. And almost like it was like he was trying to draw that out of him, to admit who he was. Was he standing in the presence of God?
Yeah, good insight.
And that's what, so he said Satan does that to him in the wilderness, but that's what they said to God in Exodus. It's just, is God really among us? And then that's what they said to Messiah when they went to crucify him. If you're the Messiah, tell us plainly, are you among us or not?
This is
That's a pattern that's like
Good.
this sounds like human beings testing God. That's not the way it works.
That's what it is.
God tests us. We are not here to test him. I think sometimes we just need to shut it down a little.
Keep our mouths shut. Yeah, and I'm going to circle this back to Sihon and Og, the kings of Heshbon and such, the king of the talkers, the king of the Amorites, and what these guys represent. And I think that these two things can keep us from crossing the Jordan River. And the one is our human reason, not having faith, not trusting in God. I know, and you know, if you've been a Christian for more than a couple of weeks, trusting in God is really hard. Is it just me? Is it just me? No? Come on, let's see some more heads shaking. All right. No, it's not just me. If you guys are like me and you're human, I assume that you look around and you have trouble seeing God at work in your life. Not like things aren't happening, it's just things are happening that you don't want to happen.
You shouldn't look around so much.
There's a great point. She said maybe you shouldn't look around so much. Yeah, believe me, I totally get it. But you know what? There's times when things happen close to you and you don't need to look around much. They're just right there next to you. And you're going to have to deal with that. There's difficult things that happen. But yes, I do think that often a lot of the people I know are looking around too much. And I think that we need to learn to let the faith that we have in God start to rule our lives a lot more than it has been. To really get our heads in the cloud. Because what do you think it means? That we have that expression in English, your head's in the clouds. What does that mean to you? It means somebody's like oblivious to what's happening around them. And you know what? Frankly, right now, I think that's the way we need to be. We really do need to have our heads in the cloud. We need to have our heads in the heavenly cloud. We need to have our heads in that condensation water, the water of the Word. We need to be so immersed in the water of the Word and filling our minds with His Word that everything else kind of gets drowned out. And we only see what He wants us to see, what He would show us, and instead of what's everything else that's going on around us. Because that stuff, it's hard to maintain your faithfulness and be in trusting in God when you're looking around you and you see all the stuff that's happening in the world. It's really challenging. And I think that your human reason and intellect gets in the way. The other thing is that, go ahead, who's talking?
I just wanted to say that, so many times I think that as humans, our own expectations that are not fulfilled the way we want them or we think they should be by God gets in the way, and we tend to put human attributes on God, and He's not human, He's God. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for a lot of people to just comprehend what that really is. I mean, creator of the universe, you can't touch that, you know.
Right.
That's
And
humility.
that we expect things of how he's going to do this in our life, or tell us this, or show us that, and he doesn't do it that way. Sometimes you have to seek out things, you know. You study it out, then he shows you, or put pieces together like we do in this group. We appreciate this group because we can string things along that if you just read the story you don't see, but when you dig in you do. So.
Yeah, you just need to slow down for a minute and talk about it and throw out weird ideas and reject weird ideas and pick up new ideas and just keep testing and trying on interpretations and ideas and see what you can dig around it. But yeah, it's hard, you know, when you're just reading it by yourself. You just see a list of names and a list of places and things that happen, and it's like, there's got to be more here. But that's why I think this is such a great thing when we sit down and we talk about it a little bit, we tear it apart. It does tend to unfold itself a little bit. And I think, you know, figuring out that there's this spiritual metaphor of these two kings of these Amorites that really somehow to me just represent this idea that you're not fully crossed over the Jordan. You're trapped up in human reasoning and immorality. That one of those kings is representative of human reasoning and intellect, and the other one has something to do with sexual immorality or just immorality in general. And those are the two big things that according to, you know, some of the traditional thought and interpreting, trying to interpret and extract spiritual meaning from this passage, that prevents people from crossing over, which I think is curious too, that it has to do somewhat with Acts 15, you know, that there's some of those elements there. Tracy?
And those two things are very much associated with like the doctrine of Balaam and how, you know, Satan appeals to your intellect. Well, did God really say that?
Yep.
Like, let's take a look at what the Bible says. What did he say? Oh,
Yep.
okay. Is
Well,
that how you read?
that's
You
a
know, and
great point.
And then there's the sexual immorality, which is literally how Balaam taught Balak to cause the children of Israel to curse themselves.
Yep.
So.
And you know what's interesting is that Balaam is mentioned in the very next chapter. He's coming right up in chapter 13 that Balaam is mentioned again. So I think that's a good insight, and I think that kind of should clue us in that something's going on here with Balaam and Balak. And I think sexual immorality and not trusting in God and going astray, I think that's somehow represented. And relying on your intellect. But that is soulish. Yeah, that's fleshly. And I think that many of us don't think about it in that way. A lot of times when we think about a fleshly Christian or living according to the flesh, we think about physical appetites, physical desires, whether it's sexual or overeating or doing drugs or, you know, smoking or whatever, not being able to get a hold of physical appetites. But I think that we often overlook the mental and emotional aspects of fleshliness, which not a lot of people talk about that. But pride, arrogance, pride and arrogance, and thinking you know something when you really, you know, I think there's a scripture somewhere that says, let the one who thinks he knows shut his mouth. See, I'm paraphrasing. The one who thinks he knows should act like he doesn't know anything. That's soulishness. That's part of that same fleshly thing that gets us tripped up. Like we feel like we know something. And I will tell you that some of the greatest times in my life of learning about the Word of God and learning about God in general is when I suddenly became acutely aware of how very, very little I knew. And that was at the beginning of my walk in the Hebrew roots, or, you know, Messianic, you know, whatever it is. That really upset the apple cart for me, because I had been studying the Bible since I was, you know, in my 20s. And I thought I knew some things. But then everything got flipped on its head, and I realized, you know, you really don't know much at all. And that, it was humbling, but it was the beginning of having my eyes be able to see things that I had never seen before. So Angela is absolutely right that That's a fleshly thing, this arrogance and this pridefulness. And
Well, you see it in Hebrew roots people that they figure they know something now.
yeah, that's a big problem for us Hebrew roots people, is that now that we've figured something out, we're right back where we started, thinking we got everything figured out.
All sorts of problems come out of that.
All sorts of problems come out of that. You notice that one of the most prominent problems with the Hebrew roots movement is dissension in the ranks. That's a problem that the children of Israel had in the wilderness. Somebody, deciding, let's turn back. Korah rebelling. Let's turn back and splintering. Carla?
Messianics.
Very messy antics. Very messy antics. Yes, so human reasoning, sexual immorality could preclude us from crossing over the Jordan. And I have here in my notes, that between verses 6 and 7 in Joshua 12, we see land that was provided by Moshe. Notice that language that you see there, that it literally says that land that was provided by Moshe.
But then it says for the rest of it provided by Joshua.
Yes, but then the rest of it was provided by Joshua. Is there a difference between these two places and the method and the leadership under which they were taken? That's a question that I have in my notes here. I don't necessarily have the answer to it, but the way that it is worded in the text leads me to believe that there's definitely something significant here in verses 6 and 7, where it starts telling us how Moshe provided this land to the east of the Jordan, but then Joshua provided them the land to the west of the Jordan. That is significant to me somehow. I have not yet been able to exactly figure out what that is, but I think it has something to do with Moses and the Messiah. As the Torah representing by Moses, and Yeshua, the letter and the Spirit, something like that. Carla?
Well, I just popped in my head about how there's a land given right now, and as first coming, we have a land designated Israel, but the fullness of that land probably won't be seen. I mean, a lot more than the current country of Israel belongs to Israel, the remnant, and is God's land. But when he comes again, and that's Joshua, perhaps that's when we get the rest of it.
Yeah, that's a good insight. Good insight. There's some mysterious things going on here for sure that bear out more study for sure. Another thing that I noted in verse 7 was that we have a full accounting of all the kings and the territories taken by Joshua from verses 7 on. So why do we have such lengthy lists of people and places?
Why does it say Echad?
Yes, and why after each king's name does it say one, or the Hebrew word Echad, which is curious. It's certainly curious. I mean, if you were to say, is there another Hebrew word for one? Now, I know that the letter Aleph means one. So, but I don't know if they would normally put in the text Aleph to mean one or Beit to mean two. I don't know enough about Hebrew to state whether that is true. But it certainly seems odd to me that after each of these kings listed, it says the word Echad. It's a little strange.
But Echad does show up a little later in Joshua. One man will put 1,000 to flight. Echad Ish.
Echad Ish. One man will put 1,000 to flight. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? I don't know. It seems significant to me somehow. I put in my notes, why do we have such lengthy lists of peoples and places, and why is it that the word Echad appears after each one? It could be that this is simply important because it is to be treated as a legal land deed, which I think is important. If you're talking about legal ownership of the land, where you were able to, and all cultures did this, where when they defeat their enemies, they make record of the defeat for the purpose of legal treatises, which says, we have defeated you, your stuff belongs to us now. Your land, all of your goods, you have been defeated and we are taken over. So there's certainly a very basic fact of record keeping, and I think that's totally legitimate. However, I think that's also a record for future generations of the victory that was given and the possession that was secured of the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is a fulfillment of those promises that were delivered to the patriarchs. I think that land, I know that some of the teachers you guys have heard over the years talk about how important that land is. That this land is, it is pictured in a lot of these prophets as the fulmination of the promises. It has to do with the land. And this is them actually inheriting the land. These are the promises that came, 470 approximately years prior to this event. Also, it is certainly true that this is the case, but more so also a commemorative document that recounts for all generations the great faith victories that were won over the enemies. I think this is also important for us, because I don't know if you do this, but perhaps you should, and I think it's a great technique that I use myself and I advocate to other people. If you don't have a faith journal, you should make one. And one of the things I have in my journal, I don't call it a faith journal, it's just a journal, but it recounts things that happen in my life, good things. I have a whole section of my journal that is for things that have been overcome, prayers that have been answered, victories that have been gained, successes that have been achieved in a life of a person, or in my own life personally, the life of my children. Having a record to be able to go back and look at the victories that God has provided in my life. I think there's nothing more important than that. That is, I think, how we fill our minds with faith, is we look back at all of the things that God has done for us, all of the promises that He promised and all the promises that were fulfilled. Now, all of the big promises that we have in our Bibles are not fully fulfilled, but you know that God has made many promises both through Himself, through His prophets, through the prophet, the Messiah, Yeshua, that I know that if you took a little bit of time periodically to just go back over your life and think about how things have turned out and victories that you've achieved and things that could have gone catastrophically wrong that didn't. There are so many victories that you have achieved that you really ought to have a record of them, because being able to review those things periodically, especially at a low point. And I get those low points myself, especially after big bursts of creative energy that I have to expend on, projects that I'm working on. When those projects when I'm in the midst of these big projects and lots of things are going on and, things are going well and I'm overcoming challenges and I'm having some victories, when these big projects come to a conclusion, you are physically and emotionally spent, and that leaves you in a vulnerable place. And you're also anticipating, okay, what's next? What's coming up next for me? Those are down times for me in my life, and those are the times that I need to, and I do, open up that faith journal, and I look at the record of victories that I have achieved that God has achieved in my life, that the ways that God has been with me. I will tell you a story. This was years ago. You know, when we were a little younger, you know, and there was, you know, times were tight financially. And this is one of the things that is in my journal. I think that we had a tire that went bad on one of our cars or something. And it was like brought to our attention, okay, the tires on your car are shot. You need tires. And I was like, you know, we took the car over to the discount tire or whatever, and like, yeah, we could set you up with 4 new tires. That's going to be $1,000. And I'm like, sweet mother of pearl, that's a lot of money. And we didn't have that money, you know. And I had recently done a real estate transaction, which was a small one. It was like a rental. I think I was only owed like a couple of $100, but every little bit counts. So I went down to my real estate office and I said, okay, I'm here to pick up my money. You know, all $300 of it. And they said, yeah, here you go. And they handed me 2 checks. And I said, what's this? What's the other one? They said, oh, that's something that's been sitting here in the office for months. It was a check that you never picked up. I'm like, what? I opened that envelope. There was a check for like $3,000 that was just sitting in my office for months that I didn't even know was there. It was a commission check on another property I had sold months before that was just sitting there. Now, I don't leave money like that lying around. That's not something. Yeah. And yeah, you know, that's one of those times to me when, and this literally happened like the same day that we were told we needed $1,000 worth of tires on a car, you know. You go down to the place and you find an additional check for like $3,000 that you didn't even know you had. Just small things like that have happened periodically. And I keep a record of those things because so many things like that have happened. The things that God has come through for me, those are such big things. And I think that's an important aspect of this chapter of just a list of names. It's a list of victories. It's a list of victories. And I think you have to have a list of victories. Do you dig it? Can you dig it? I don't have much more to say about that, but I know Daryl would like to say hello to us. One of you Daryls. Looked like you were about to say something, Daryl. Sorry. No, yeah, say something, Daryl. Say hi.
Well, I was going to just say that's really good advice because I think that does really strengthen your faith when many times you might not be aware how to strengthen your faith until you open your book and go, okay, that makes sense. Then you give God the glory, and what happens is you do bring your faith up. So that was a very good story, Alan, and good advice.
I appreciate that. I think, you know, it's one thing to look at the promises of God and to have hope for the promises of the future that have not yet been fulfilled. And that's a good experience. That's a good practice as well, to have in your mind the things that God has promised that are still in the future, and keeping our minds focused on those things that will be brought to us at the revelation of Messiah Yeshua. That's very, very helpful. But I don't think anything is more helpful than looking back in your past at the ways that God has rescued you and done amazing things in your life and the life of people around you. To me, that's more tangible. That might take less faith, frankly, because it's experiential. It's not looking forward to things that have not yet happened. Both are important, though, I think. You know, being able to look forward and really anticipate those good things that are coming, that's important. It takes more faith, though. But I think it can strengthen our faith to look back over the things that have already been fulfilled. And I think primarily that's a big lesson for me in the Bible in general. When I look at when I'm reading a lot of the stuff especially in the prophets, which is really challenging to me, the prophets are. I mean, there are very cryptic things for sure. There are some things, a lot of it has to do with the Messiah Yeshua. But I look at the prophets sometimes and I think, you know, what is the big thing that I'm supposed to take away from this? And I think a lot of times it is God spoke it beforehand and it came to be exactly as he said it would be. And I think we don't take enough from that to really consider all of the times throughout these thousands of years that God has been giving his message to his people. They've been writing it in these books that we now call our Bibles, that we don't give enough credit to the idea that continuously over thousands of years, God just keeps saying things and then they keep coming true. And then he keeps saying things and they keep coming true. And we're supposed to ingest that. We're supposed to continuously be filling our minds with that and seeing, man, he just keeps promising things and it just keeps happening exactly like he said it would. It just over and over and over and over and over. And this is one of those things. We lose sight of that a little too quickly, I think. Just to remember, God said to Abraham when he was all by himself in the land of Ur, leave your family, leave your house, leave your, all your people and go to this land that I'm going to show you. I'm going to make your descendants thus and such. Here it is. Said the same thing to his son and the same thing to his son. It's all happening right before our very eyes here in this chapter. Carla?
Well, what you said just prompted me to recall that the role in like marriage, the man, the zakar, to the woman who's the Ezer Kenegdo, and the zakar, his main purpose is to remember. And you can remember the word, or you can remember your experiences, remember the promises. It doesn't matter as long as you remember. And that's really important. You nailed it.
Making sure that you remember what you should remember and forget what you should forget is really important. I remember Paul said something about that, forgetting what lies behind and looking forward to what is ahead of us. So I don't remember exactly the phrasing that he used, but forgetting. It's important to forget certain things, and it's important to remember other things. That's all I have for you, folks, and I think that'll do us for chapter 12. Chapter 13 and some of these next chapters, we have some of these similar challenges that we're going to have to face, where it seems to be just a list of places that were inherited by different people, and we're going to have to work through those and see. And I challenge you for when we get together next time in chapter 13. Chapter 13 is a little bit different than chapter 12. I think it's got a little bit more meat that we can pick from those bones. But next week, be prepared to discuss chapter 13, and I think we'll have a good time doing it. And I hope to see some of you in person if you're available. May the Lord bless you all and keep you and guard you and protect you and make his face to shine upon you and all that good stuff. Anything else for the good of the order?